Now, famine has been officially declared in Gaza City and its surrounding neighbourhoods. There are calls for sanctions to be placed on Israel, like those imposed against South Africa during apartheid. Well, let's speak now to the former First Minister of Scotland and, of course, member of the Scottish Parliament, Humza Yousaf. Humza Yousaf, good afternoon to you and thank you for joining us. So what do you envisage being put in place in terms of sanctions on Israel?
Well, look, first and foremost, let's realise what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a government that today has been concluded they are imposing a famine on the people of Gaza, specifically Gaza City, but likely to spread across the entirety of Gaza. We're dealing with a government that is headed up by a man who's wanted by the most senior criminal court in the world, the ICC, for war crimes and crimes against humanity. We're dealing with a government that has, as of today, killed, it's estimated, over 17,000 children and well over 60,000 innocent civilians. We're dealing with a government that the ICJ says that there's a plausible case for genocide. We're dealing with a rogue nation that is breaching and breaking international law with absolute impunity. And the only way that we can deal with such a rogue nation is to apply meaningful economic and trade sanctions, and also beginning to isolate Israel in the same way that we isolated apartheid in Africa, because the words of condemnation, the hand-wringing, none of that is working. It's failing and falling on deaf ears in the Israeli government. And the only meaningful action, I think, that I think will make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, as you'll know, Humza Yousaf, Israel rejects many of those charges that you put to them. And how would you be able to establish enough international support for sanctions to be placed? Or do you see it being done sort of by a few nations? Because wouldn't that just be easy for them to get around, as we've seen with Russia? Sanctions have been levied, huge sanctions, and yet their economy has managed to weather this and they're still attacking Ukraine.
Well, a few things. Let's be clear, whatever the strategy has been by the international community for the last 22 months has utterly and abysmally failed. Gaza is starving. Gaza is being starved, actually, is more accurate, to the point where the IPC is now saying that famine has been imposed, not by nature's doing, man-made famine, on the people of Gaza City. So whatever strategies that have been attempted in the last 22 months have abysmally failed. And so the plea has to be to prime ministers and presidents, where you have failed thus far, we must not fail in the future. And the only way that I can see Israel changing course is if it begins to feel meaningful action taken against it. And that includes sanctions. It also includes cultural boycotts, sporting boycotts, the way that we have done, for example, with Russia. And some would argue, and you make the point about the fact that the war against Ukraine is continuing, but nonetheless bringing Russia to the negotiating table in a way that, let's be frank, Netanyahu is not interested in peace. He's interested in political survival.
Humza Yousaf, I know that the sanctions you're calling for against Israel, but what about the other belligerents in the war? What about Hamas, who we know are accused of stealing food and of hunkering down in civilian areas, making civilians more of a target for them? Is there more pressure that can be put on a terror group to try and bring them to the table and get this to stop from that side as well?
Look, first and foremost, let's be clear that a number of aid agencies have rejected this charge that aid is being stolen. What aid agencies have told us, hundreds of them, some of the most credible names in humanitarian development who've been to virtually every conflict zone in the world over the years, tells us there's simply not enough aid going into Gaza. And from my wife's family who are in Gaza, they'll tell us, of course, when you don't have enough food going in, people are going to fight for that aid in order to try to get as much as they can for their families. That's human instinct, that's survival of the fittest, and it's not the fault of the people of Gaza by any stretch of the imagination. It's the fault, of course, of those who are refusing to allow hundreds of food trucks of aid to come into Gaza. So can more be done to pressure Hamas? That should always be done. And I know, for example, some of those who are involved in negotiations, such as the government of Qatar, are doing that. But let's be clear, it is the government of Israel that is imposing such inhumane conditions on the people of Gaza, which has resulted in hundreds of thousands, if not millions, facing acute malnourishment.
Humza Yousaf, in your second answer, I'm not quite sure you got to how you're going to galvanise sort of global support for this kind of sanctions package. And I'll put to you as well a point that I put to Mustafa Baghouti in the last hour, that not on this, but on the decision to recognise a Palestinian state by the UK. There's a promise to do so if a ceasefire can come about. If a ceasefire doesn't come about in Israel, that the UK government will recognise a Palestinian state. Mike Huckabee, the US ambassador to Israel, says that actually that's given the Israeli government something of a green light specifically to further this E1 project in the West Bank. I wonder how you view that and whether or not this call for sanctions, if it's not the entirety of the world, will perhaps strengthen the Israeli government to continue what it's doing in some parts.
You're right. Let me answer your question. You're right. I didn't forgive me. In terms of international support, that is crucial. Coordinated action is absolutely crucial. And we've seen that coordinated action, for example, from the UK government when they've been putting out certain statements. They've done that jointly, for example, with leaders of France and Canada. We've seen the likes of Norway, Ireland and Spain working in coordination when it came to the recognition of Palestine last year. So there is coordinated action that governments can take. They should take in a coordinated fashion. And I'm afraid, kind of segueing into your question around Mr. Huckabee, the United States, of course, is giving Israel cover. It's giving them a blank check to break international law with impunity. Let's take the issue around the E1 plan. The creation, development, and further expansion of settlements is illegal under international law. There's virtually no equivocation about it. International law is clear around the expansion of settlements being illegal. Virtually every country, I think with the exception of Israel and the United States, views them as illegal. So to suggest that when the people who are being oppressed, starved, killed, their children are being massacred, that they are the ones to blame for their own suffering and misery is victim blaming of the highest order. The perpetrators, the occupiers that are committing such atrocities are clearly the ones that need to be brought to heel.
Humza Yousaf, just finally, your family in Gaza, have you spoken to them recently? Your wife's family are there, aren't they? Can you just tell us how they are and have you spoken to them in the last few?
Yeah, we speak to them every day as best as we possibly can. And I've really ran out of words. What can I say to you around how the situation is? The family are starving. If you can imagine holding your own children in your arms and watching them waste away in front of you, losing weight, becoming emaciated, while you yourself are struggling to live because you're hungry. We sent some money to Nadia's family, a couple of £100 recently. We send them money regularly. That £200 bought them less than 10 items, basic items. Talk about pasta, flour, some yogurt, less than 10 items because the food prices are so overinflated because of the scarcity. So we are dealing with, as we know today from the IPC, famine. And of course, Nadia's family is affected. But more importantly, the almost 2 million people in Gaza are dying in front of our eyes while the world watches on and does nothing meaningful about it. Surely today's announcement of famine in Gaza, that has to change things on the ground. Otherwise, I don't know if humanity can possibly recover from such a dreadful and awful situation.
Humza Yousaf, former First Minister of Scotland, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.